Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new workshop for the Inspire New Readers campaign. My name is Maria Cruz. I'm a Communications and Outreach Manager at the Community Engagement Department. And here with me today are Casey Harold, Satip Jill, and
Hi.
And Lauren Miranda. And we're going to go over the workshop, How to Plan a Pilot.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Maria said, we are going to go through a workshop today called How to Plan a Pilot. You may have seen this workshop at Wikimedia 2017, led by our coworker, Sati Houston. She works on the community resources or the grants team at the foundation, and she created this amazing workshop on getting started on planning a pilot, which is exactly what we hope a lot of you will do with the ideas that you submitted in the campaign. So we're going to talk first about what a pilot is. Then we're going to go over how you would run a pilot and how to plan a pilot. And at various points in here, we'll have some activities that you can try out after the workshop is over, or if you're online, you can submit your ideas or responses to our questions in the chat box. Either way is fine, though I do recommend finding a friend to work with at various parts of this, because it's nice to discuss your ideas with people as you're moving through this. All right, so what is a pilot? It does sound like a tricky word, and no, we don't mean an airplane pilot. It's actually really quite different. And a pilot, it's a chance to experiment, it's a test, it's a trial, it's looking for proof of concept. Basically, it's taking the ideas that you have and seeing how well it works before you make it a lot bigger. So, an experimental or preliminary test or trial of your solution on a limited scale. So, the idea of doing a pilot is to test an idea. You're trying to prove that your idea can be done. It's something that's small. Less than 20 people are involved, fewer than 3 events. It would also mean focusing on a small set of content or maybe just one classroom if you're doing something for education. It's something that's simple. It's a place where you can easily make mistakes and change things. Nothing is permanent or irreversible. And it also leads to incremental benefits. The impact of a pilot will probably be small, but that's okay. It's the space where you're testing things out to find out what's working, what doesn't work, what would need to be improved before you make something bigger. It's really a space for freedom to see what you could do to make your idea even better. So when would you do a pilot, and why would you do a pilot? Here is a test case that a lot of people might be able to relate to. What you're looking at here is a sandcastle, a small castle or other building made with wet sand on the beach. So here's the situation. You are at the beach. There are not any sandcastles on the beach. That doesn't really feel like a beach day. So your solution is you're going to build a sandcastle. Probably not like this. But it might be what you have in mind. That is the big idea. A gorgeous sandcastle would really make this beach so much better. Unfortunately, you've never made a sandcastle before. Or maybe not. Maybe you're like me. I'm sort of in this 1, 2, 3 range of things. Trying things out for the first time. Not so good at it. So this is the pilot phase, the 1, 2, 3. Once you've got the basic skills down of making a sandcastle, you can get into things that are a little more exciting. Once you know how to work with the wet sand and you have a great system for getting more water over from the beach and the various tools that you would need to do to make a big sandcastle. So going back, the pilot, like this, actually looks like a lot of fun and helps you get closer to here. So when we're piloting, we want to test feasibility. We want to make sure that the idea that we have is something that can be done. And there are a lot of reasons why the idea you have might not be doable. It could be you or your team don't have the skills that you need to do it well. You want to know that you have resources to do something. And once you have resources, maybe there are other resources you didn't know about. You'll learn about what kind of support you need to keep that project going in the longer term. And any policies or processes or things that might make it difficult to do your idea or test your project on a larger scale. It's really important to find that out early during the pilot phase so that you can plan to be successful with something larger. Another reason to pilot is to understand the impact of your work. Sometimes the best ideas can require a lot of work, but they don't actually do that much. Your ideas about what you might be accomplished with a project or an idea may not actually be relevant, may not be true. Finally, we want to minimize future risk. So we want to lower the risk of things like volunteer burnout, wasting money, losing trust. You want to minimize the risk of directing people to a place where there's nothing there for them or various other problems. So if we were in a room together to ask if anyone has questions, and if you do, you're welcome to post those either in this chat or on the discussion page of the Inspire campaign, and we'll be happy to answer questions there. So now that we've gone over what a pilot is, we're going to talk about how to plan a pilot. So there are 5 steps for planning a pilot. First, define what the problem is. Second, define the solution. An important part here is to list your assumptions about that solution. 3, list your constraints, resources, and activities. So those are things that would limit you or things that you can't change or work around, the resources that you have access to, and the activities that you would need to do to complete the project. 4, and this is optional, is to create a monitoring plan. Is there something that you'll look at on a weekly, daily, or monthly basis to make sure that things are going okay? I think in the Inspire New Readers pilot projects, a monitoring plan probably isn't that important because it's a short project. And then 5, this is an important part, is to create an evaluation plan. So I'm going to go through each of these steps in a little more detail. So, number 1, define the problem. The problem should be small. So what is small enough? What you're looking for is something that can be done with the resources that you have available. Now, while we are providing grants, or grants are available for people to print things, to make visits to places, to hire video editors or graphic designers, the limit of the project should be $2,000 US. And if possible, less than that. You want to start fairly small. An example from an event would be an event with less than 20 participants, only 1 partner, if any partners at all, and less than 3 events. So not planning a large series of things, but just 1 or 2 things to see how things go. 1 or 2 events to see how things go, sorry. So at the end of your pilot, you should have a very clear sense of success or failure in addressing that problem. So that means when you're done with it, you know, well, did this actually work and accomplish what I hoped it would, or did it do something else? So when we say success or failure, it can mean a lot of things, but you know if this is something that makes sense to continue. So here is an example of how you would make a problem smaller. So the initial problem is there aren't enough biographies about women scientists on Wikipedia. So in our effort to make it smaller, we're making it more specific. So there aren't enough biographies about African-American women engineers on English Wikipedia, or African-American women engineers within the field of electrical engineering on English Wikipedia. And now that's African-American women engineers in electrical engineering born after 1950. So by making this problem more and more specific, you're targeting a smaller set of work to to accomplish during your pilot project. And I think that that's an important thing to do with any of the projects that you're considering piloting in the New Readers campaign. So I'm going to work with the folks here on our call today to make an idea or a project smaller. So we're going to start by picking one of the problems that we'd like to solve, or one of the solutions that was offered in the Idea Lab campaign, or I'm sorry, the Inspire campaign. One that I read a couple of weeks ago was a suggestion to put QR codes in textbooks so that when students were reading in their textbooks, they would see QR codes that would link to Wikipedia. So I think that this project would benefit from becoming smaller. Doing that kind of thing would require several years of work. It would require relationships with Board of Education. It would require having publishers change their textbooks. It would require a lot of review of content there. So Maria, Satdeep, Lauren, do you think each of you could think of one way to make that idea smaller? Something that could be tried in a shorter period of time?
One of the ideas that I come up with after hearing this problem is it's something that has been tried earlier in some cities, that people have put QR codes in front of different monuments.
Okay.
In a specific city.
Okay, so something that's smaller than that is, instead of trying to get published in a textbook, put QR codes on city monuments so that people can learn more about those monuments. That seems like it would require less time and less work. Does anyone else have ideas?
So, for example, if we're thinking of adding QR codes to workbooks in schools, instead of targeting the entire school, we can start with one class.
Okay.
Yeah, within one year, and test how the QR codes bring more traffic to Wikipedia, for example.
That's an interesting idea. I was thinking, textbooks are one way that students get material and they learn about their homework, or get the information they need for homework. But when I was in school, we got worksheets, so printouts. And I don't know how common that is in other places. But if you were putting QR codes on worksheets or on printed material that teachers are distributing, that would be a way to test whether or not students are going there and using that information. But that's a great idea, to try it in just one classroom. Does anyone else have ideas? I will think of one myself. So it seems like the goal of this is to get Wikipedia articles that relate to students' work in front of them so that they can learn more than what's there. I wonder if printing out articles that are relevant to students would be helpful, or sending students links in an email to all of the articles that apply to their homework one week, and then asking the teacher how that went the next week. Does anyone else have something?
I just wanted to add on that, and we should just focus that on one institution and one classroom at a time.
Great reminder. Yeah, so it sounds like together we suggested ideas like, instead of printing QR codes in textbooks, which would take several years to do, and a lot of work and a lot of people participating, Satdeep suggested adding QR codes to monuments in a city and see, are people using those QR codes? Maria suggested testing this out in one classroom at one school during 1 year to see, is there more traffic to Wikipedia articles? And I suggested sending students links to Wikipedia articles or adding the QR codes to printed materials that the teacher gives them. So those are 3 ways that we have proposed to make this idea of QR codes in textbooks something smaller, something that we can test. So I think, yeah, I hope that folks get the idea of that. I'm going to move on to the next phase. Yes, Sati calls us to remember the really big, gorgeous sandcastle that probably won a contest did start with a person making a single bucket sandcastle on the beach somewhere. So just because you're starting really small does not mean you won't go to big, important, really beautiful places. Okay, so number 2, define the solution that you want to test. It should be simple. So what is simple? And this is an important way to work through what your idea is. Make a list of what your assumptions are about your project. Are your assumptions realistic? And when I say your assumptions, I mean, back with the QR codes again, the assumption is that students have test books. That's a thing to check. An assumption could be that students have access to the internet. Other assumptions are that there's content on Wiki that applies to these student studies. So it's important to make a list of all of the things that you assume will be true about your project or your idea, so that you can check to see them. Are they true? Is there something you need to do to mitigate or get around that problem? So another thing is consider your skills and experience and your project team. How experienced are you? How much are you experimenting with? You should only be testing one thing at a time. So I saw a lot of ideas in the campaign that listed many different activities that would build towards growing awareness somewhere. What I recommend is choosing just one of those ideas to start with. It's easier to find out if the idea or the project that you're trying works and maybe what doesn't work about it if you're just testing one assumption and one solution at a time. As you get more experience with the first one that you try, you can add in additional things that you'd like to test with your projects. And the other thing there is consider your skills and experience and your project team. So like I said, we do have funding available to fund professional support from someone like a graphic designer or a video editor. And I think that that's a really important thing to consider if you're creating some kind of visual material. If you're making a poster or a sticker or something else that's going out, you want to have something that is compelling, interesting, catches the eye. If you don't get funding or don't want to look for a grant to do this, finding people in your community, friends who might be able to help with their design skills or their public speaking skills. This is another important thing to do when you're talking to a group of people. Does someone really interesting and funny and good at doing presentations? That's the kind of person you would want to help you out on a project where you might be talking to a large group of people. So another aspect of simplicity is thinking about who will participate. Are you asking people to do too many things, complex things? It's a good idea to keep the tasks in your pilot project simple. It can take a lot of work to explain what you want people to do if there's a very complex task, and better to give people simple things that they can do. I think this applies both to your volunteer team that you're working with and to the people that you're trying to reach with your awareness idea. Giving them a very simple command of come to Wikipedia to find information about Black women scientists and electrical engineers before the 1950s, or very simple next steps that people should follow. And finally, who will be affected by your pilot? You should get their buy-in first. That would mean if you're doing something to change the wiki landing page where you're working, or that might violate some policy on wiki, it's a good idea to check with people who are active on that wiki to find out, is there something you don't know about that will affect them? Is there a way that you can get them to support you if there is something that's disruptive that might happen? I think it's always a good idea to find out who would be affected on wiki and off wiki and talk to them first. Another example is you won't be able to go into a classroom until you get permission from a teacher. But does that teacher need to get permission from someone else? Does that teacher need to make plans in advance about how they will change their schedule during the week to cover all their work? It's just important to be involving everyone who could be affected by your pilot. So, exercise 2. For the smallest problem you wrote down before, write a solution to that problem. And under the solution, you should list 3 assumptions about the project and why you think those assumptions are true. And then list 3 skills you don't have that you need for this project to succeed. So I know that in the last round of the exercises, I worked with the idea of QR codes. In this one, I'm going to present a different project that I saw. And this was creating did you know posters and posting them in places where lots of people would see them. So did you know posters? If you're not familiar, when there are new articles on Wiki, there's a did you know page that gets created. And those pages get featured on the front page of wikis and have a lot of information about the subject. So this proposal to create posters, or did you know posters, sharing facts from Wikipedia and putting them up in lots of places. To me, that sounds like a small enough idea to get started with. So that's why I'm going to move on to assumptions about that project. And again, crew that's here on the video, it would be awesome if you would work with me to, I guess, think of one assumption each about the project and why you think that assumption is true. And then one skill that you don't have that you think would be needed for this project to succeed. I'm going to go first, then I hope someone will jump in after me. So for the posters, I assume that there's a place that I can post posters, that I can stick them to walls that people will see them. I assume that the posters will get to stay up. Does anyone else? I think that assumption is true because I've seen posters around in my neighborhood and in the places that I go in my community. Does anyone have other assumptions they'd share? Or things you would assume to be true?
So I think that if the poster contains some interesting pictures and also it's going to contain an interesting fact, so that's something that's going to attract people towards the poster.
So you assume that an interesting fact and an interesting photo are going to be necessary for someone to read the poster.
Yes.
I have a question to follow up on that. How long do you think someone will stop and read a poster?
For how long?
Yeah.
I think 10 to 15 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to think about. So if you're creating a poster, thinking, yeah, people will stop for 10 to 15 seconds. So you really shouldn't have more information on that poster than someone can digest in 10 to 15 seconds. So I think you're right. Just a cool fact and a great picture. Do you think that seeing that will make you want to know, what is Wikipedia? How do I get there?
Yes, that's what I assume.
So Lauren, Maria, do either of you have assumptions that you might share about this?
I can share assumptions about the idea that I shared before.
Okay.
So including QR codes on workbooks,
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the assumptions, the underlying assumption, is that teachers appreciate the content of Wikipedia for its quality.
Yeah.
And that could be not true. Some teachers think that we shouldn't use Wikipedia to teach students, and so I think that's an important assumption to test.
I think you're right. I'm thinking I think I may have said earlier with the QR codes and textbooks, an assumption is that Wikipedia has information that's relevant to students' curriculum, but also has information that's written at a skill level or at a reading level that students would understand, or in a language that students would understand. So these are really good assumptions to think about. So any other assumptions about making a poster? I think a good assumption is that I assume that when people see the poster and enjoy the fact, that they'll want to read more and come to Wikipedia, and that they will remember the name Wikipedia next time they're searching for something that they know. And with that assumption, something that I learn is, how do I make that clear on the poster? Or how do I reinforce the word Wikipedia so that people recognize it when they search for something, and know what to do next after seeing the poster? I think that's a helpful idea to get from that assumption. So I'm going to go on to skills. So what are 3 skills that you don't have that you would need for this project to succeed? And I'm going to say, Maria, maybe you can think of skills that would relate to the QR codes and textbooks. And Satdeep, you and I can think about skills that would relate to creating a poster. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. I will go first with the poster. I have pretty limited graphic design experience. I count on Maria a lot of times to make things better looking. Or I take presentations created by Sati that are already really good looking. So I would need to find someone who could help me create a cool and compelling design for the poster.
Okay, I had that in mind, so I'm gonna go with something else now. So,
Okay.
yes, the skill I don't have is that I don't have appropriate contacts at my university to get the permission to get those posters on the notice boards and other important places.
Oh, that's a great thing to point out. So Satip says the skill he doesn't have is he doesn't know who to talk to at his university to get permission to put up posters. And if you're going to that university or you know someone there, I bet that if you ask enough friends, someone will have that skill. So that's a really good one to think about. How are you going to get the thing out in the first place? Let me think of another skill. So this isn't as much a skill, but a resource. I don't have a very good printer, so I couldn't make a lot of posters. I would look for someone else to print the posters for me.
Yes, we can get them printed up from somewhere.
Yeah, there might be someone else who can do the printing for me. Maria, do you want to talk about skills that would be needed to do QR codes in student work?
Yeah. So I would say lesson planning.
Okay.
Having basic knowledge of pedagogy and lesson planning for school children.
that is a significant skill that people spend years in school and then many more years in the classroom learning. So how to teach students and how to make a lesson plan isn't a skill you have.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of a skill that I don't have that would be challenging for this project. I don't. Let's see. Well, I guess I have all the skills. I can't think of one. So I'll just keep moving on. But that's a great thing to think about. Like, do you know how to make a compelling lesson plan? If you don't, look for someone who can help with that. I was going to say, if we were going to go and present this to students at an elementary school or a secondary school, the skill I don't have is convincing teachers. I'm not a very persuasive person. So I would need to find someone to work with who could persuade teachers or who has a relationship with a teacher who's willing to try this in their classroom. Or I would need help to create a persuasive argument for why we should do this and get help refining that. I think that's what I would need to get this done. So I'm going to move on here. All right. So in this one, I think we're not going to do this one right now as a group because we have sort of discussed these as we've gone along. But what I recommend doing as you are working through the idea that you've posted in the campaign or any other idea that you want to pilot is to find someone that you can talk to after you've done some thinking about the size of the problem, your solution, and your assumptions. Because as you've seen here, having these conversations can be helpful to understand things that you aren't seeing, or have someone who can call out places where your ideas are really brilliant or where you're onto something and you should explore that more. I think that the ideas that you've got now are a great jumping off point to create pilot projects and other projects that we can try out to see what grows awareness. And if you want to have these conversations with someone at WMF, you can ask Chris Schilling or myself, Casey Harold, on your discussion page or by email for some support with that or to check kind of work that you're doing. But I highly recommend talking to someone who lives where you live, who knows the people that you know, who is familiar with the kinds of challenges and problems that you are going to be working with. So the third thing you're going to do when you're working through planning a pilot is to list your constraints, resources, and activities. So your resources are, how many people do you need to do this? What would your budget be? And this is a space, I think, listing the things that if there are skills that you don't have or services that you can't do yourself, making a list of those and then getting some prices online or calling and asking a couple of people, what would it cost to print 100 posters? Or how much would it cost to get 2 to 3 hours of graphic design time? Is that enough time to create a poster? Calling around and getting those estimates so that you have that information. Like I said, we can provide grants for these projects, and we hope many of you will apply for grants. But just listing the things that you think you'll need to get that done. It's also important to think of, are there taxes that you should be including? Are there other fees or things that you haven't expected? Other resources are there tools you can use? And I think this is a really relevant one for many of the projects people have proposed here. Are there tools on Wiki that can help you identify articles that are very popular? Are there tools off Wiki, such as Google Trends, that can help you find out what is popular and interesting to people? I think another on-Wiki tool could be, are there tools that can help you find gaps in content that you want to fill? Satdeep has shared a project in the past that he did where they created content on Punjabi literature because that was something that was missing on Punjabi Wikipedia. and was very hard to find online. So I know that there are tools for finding content gaps, and I think on the Wikimedia Resource Center, you should be able to dig a little bit deeper and see if there are tools or people who can help you solve some of those problems. So with constraints, what you're thinking about here is, do you have a deadline? Is there some kind of limit to the resource? And are there cultural behaviors that would prevent or inhibit this work? So in terms of deadline with these pilots, I'd like to recommend that people plan a pilot that they can test in the next 6 months so that they can get started quickly. So I would suggest, if you get a grant in this round, to plan a project that goes from March until June. March is when you would receive the funding, though you could start work ahead of time on things that don't need funding. So is this something that you can do in 6 months? And if your project doesn't seem like it can be done in 6 months, is there some part you can do in 6 months? So limitations to resources. The funding that's available is up to $2,000 US. So you probably can't make a 2-minute video or commercial or something like that. And you probably can't print QR codes and textbooks across your country. Thinking about what your resources are and what you can do with those resources is really important. And then the third one, are there cultural behaviors that will prevent or inhibit this work? A cultural behavior you might think about is, do students use QR codes? Does anyone use QR codes? Do you have evidence that QR codes are something that is working in the city or town where you live? Ways you could check that is to see, what the downloads are like for QR code readers. You could look for other QR code projects and see, are lots of people doing this? If you've seen them at a cultural institution, asking the staff at that institution, so how has this project gone for you? Are people using this? Are there I'm wondering if Maria or Satip can offer suggestions of other sorts of cultural behaviors that might prevent people from doing something on a project.
Well, I was thinking that the example that I gave before about what is the educator or the teacher's attitude towards Wikipedia, right. That tends to be a cultural norm, or
yeah.
So it's common that if there's one teacher in one classroom that doesn't believe that we should use Wikipedia, there's probably more within the same school.
Yeah.
So that would be a very clear example of a cultural behavior.
Yeah. I've heard in the past with regards to education projects that sometimes it's easier to work with teachers at schools that are not, in the US we would call them a private school. I know that in different parts of the world they would call it something else, but this would be a school that's not part of the national education system, probably a school where people pay to attend. Because those schools may have more flexibility about what they can teach and what they can do with students. That's a recommendation that I've heard before with education. So if you're planning something that involves students, it would be important to ask around, is this something that you can change? Is this something that you feel open to trying? Do most teachers feel open to this? I think another way of thinking of cultural behaviors that might prevent or inhibit this, if we go to did you know posters at a university, things that might make this project hard isn't as much a cultural behavior, but it's school holidays. Is your project going to fall during a time when there's a holiday when not many people are on campus? Is it going to be during a time when there are lots of people going somewhere? Is there a time of the year when there are a whole lot, many, many more posters that are up, or fewer posters? And where do you think the posters are that people spend the most time looking at and reading? I've seen just leave that. So the constraints, I think being realistic about what those are when you're planning your project can help you get more creative about how and when and where you're going to work. And it's a lot more helpful to know what the constraints are before you start your pilot, though you will almost certainly learn of some as you're moving through your pilot. So what we would recommend that you do is make a list of the activities that you need to do as part of the pilot project and create a timeline and task list if you need to. What I would suggest for these shorter term projects is I would say, start a spreadsheet that just has each month broken down into weeks. And going through that spreadsheet and that little calendar that you're making yourself, and start by noting, when are there holidays? When are there things that might disrupt this project or give people more time to work on something? So have those to start with. And then think of the tasks that you'll need to complete to get towards the final project that you want to do. So the tasks for creating a poster might be choosing 5 or 6 articles that you think are really interesting and finding facts in those. So your first task might be creating a list of articles. Your next task could be, help me out here, Satdeep. Well, I don't see him now. Your next task could be also choosing images that are looking good. Other tasks could be getting quotes from graphic designers for support from their work, getting estimates from a printer about the cost of printing, getting permission from a school to post something, proofreading and finalizing the poster before it goes to print. Maybe an afternoon spent putting tape or getting materials together before posting the posters. Going and putting things up, putting the posters up, and just the other activities that you would do and other tasks that you need to do to move through your pilot project. And knowing what those are and looking at them on a calendar can really help you decide, okay, is this too many things? Is this still simple enough? Because you want to make the pilot project as easy on yourself as possible. Remember, we talked earlier about simplicity, both for yourself and for the people you work with. So this one is optional, and I think it's relevant for some projects if you're working with a lot of volunteers. And a monitoring plan might be just checking in with people who you're working with, like, do they have the things they need to continue working? Are they working too much? Is this happening during a time that's really busy for them? I think that that's something really important when you're getting multiple people in your team. And if you're working with multiple people to plan something, what's a way that you can find out what's working and not working, or what the obstacles are to moving forward? If everyone's working on a different small thing, you may not know that there's a delay with the printer because there's a national shortage on ink, that kind of thing. You just know that your printing is late. So having a way to just check in on those things. But I think where I'd like to focus the rest of our time is on creating an evaluation plan. So that might sound really daunting, and we are here to help you with that. So when you're thinking about evaluating, remember, it's important the purpose of the pilot is to test your idea, to see if it has the results that you expected or some other kind of results, to see if the cause and effect relationship that you expect will exist actually does. So what I am proposing for folks is, instead of creating an entire evaluation plan, in this stage, thinking just about what it is you could look for to see if something's working. So think about what results you would want to see. And the way to think about that is in terms of change. Is there going to be a kind of change that you're going to see, or something else? Is there going to be a change in page views on Wiki to the articles where you've posted facts? Is there going to be a change in behavior? Are people going to do something differently? Like, click on something? Are you asking people to use a QR code or do something else? I think making a list of 4 or 5 things that you think people will do in reaction to the thing that you're piloting is a really good way to get started on making an evaluation plan. Because once you have an idea of 4 or 5 different things that people might do as a reaction to your project, we can look at how to track that and how to make a plan to check, well, did people do it? And what did it look like before you started your project? So one last time, I want to see if Maria and Satdeep, if he's still there, have some ideas of what changes do we think that we will see if we can start with QR codes in the classroom or links to Wikipedia articles in the classroom.
Yeah. So one change that I'm thinking of, this is very easy. We could also say it's the low-hanging fruit. Would in the number of page views for articles. If we're adding QR codes, we expect people to scan them and visit those articles, and we expect to see a spike or an increase in the page views.
Yeah.
For those articles that we're sharing.
That's a great idea. I think you're right. So knowing, like, having a list of which articles you're going to post codes for, and using the page view tool, you can start by looking at what are the average page views each week or day or month for those before your project. And then once it starts, are people going to them? Are page views going up?
Yes.
Yeah,
that can
please
be,
share.
Yes, that can be something interesting. Page views, of course, but if the project is too small, we might not be able to evaluate much in that case. So in that case, we might have to look for something like how many people are accessing Wikipedia from a certain location, a city or a region, and how is that changing instead of just the general page views of that project.
Okay, so you want to see if the number of page views in a city or a region is going up. And maybe that's for a general kind of awareness campaign. So I don't know how to get access to that information. I know that the Wikimedia Foundation does have some country level analysis of page views each month. But I think with a pilot project, it would be really hard to affect an entire country and see significant change there.
Yeah, another yes, that's probably sensitive to say, sensible. Another thing that could be measured is how many kids within the classroom start referring to Wikipedia as the place they got the information from.
Okay, how could we find that out?
So we could, I was thinking we could just mark it down every time, or we ask them, where did you get this from? When they do an assignment, for example. Okay. We can do like a mini survey or informal survey. It can even be the teacher asking after the student presented the homework, where did you get this from, and how many kids say, I got it from Wikipedia.
Yeah, I think that you raise a good point there. Finding out, do more students use Wikipedia for their homework? And you shared a few ways that we could find that out. And I think it's important to stress, like, what is something that's really easy to do? And asking people to raise their hands if they did something is a great way to do that. If you were going to visit a classroom and tell people about Wikipedia, you might ask first, like, give a short, fun quiz of like, okay, I think Wikipedia is a place to meet friends and see how many people raise their hands. Or I think Wikipedia is a place to get restaurant reviews. Something like that. Make like a funny quiz. I think Wikipedia is a place to get good answers to information about our history or my country's history. So you could create some kind of like hands up survey that you could do in visiting a classroom, or ask a teacher to ask that question on a weekly basis for 3 weeks and see if something is changing over time. Ask the teacher to write down the number of hands that went up in response to that question. Maria also said that a survey could be something that you try doing. So there are some easy survey tools that you can use, like Google Forms for people who do have access to the internet when you're working with them. Asking people to do surveys at the time, like when you are seeing them, is really important to getting them done. If you don't have people who are online, a short handwritten survey might be something that you consider, but only if you have someone who can help you keep track of those results afterward. I'm thinking one other thing. Oh, with Telegram, which is a messaging app, and I think I've seen this on Instagram and maybe also WhatsApp, is you can do short polls where you ask a couple of questions or tell someone to say yes or no to something. I think if you're doing some kind of social media campaign, you can ask people questions that way and see like what the responses are. These are just ways to think. Like, I encourage people to think creatively about how they will get responses. And I think in places where you can't really measure, for example, are there more people in this city that are going to Wikipedia? You might be able to ask the audience that you're working with just to give a simple yes or no. Or ask people to do a specific action in response to, or to, when you're telling them about Wikipedia, give a call to action, ask them to do something. So what I encourage people to do as they're moving forward and planning their pilots is just create a list of things, 3 or 4 things that you think could change. And as we have those lists, we can help you narrow and define and look at what you're trying to do and see if there is something that will work to find that out. And I'd say think of what you can get through potentially a survey, and that's either a written survey or a verbal survey. Things that you can get from Wikipedia in terms of page views or video views. That's something that you can check. Or things that you can get from social media or something else. So that would be, how many retweets did you get? Or how many people shared a particular post? Or how many people viewed something? Having those in mind can help you think about how you're going to evaluate. Did it work? Did you reach something? Did people like what you created? Did they want to know more? So what I just went through there is, how will you know if you're successful? So it's thinking of changes from X to Y. Who or what will benefit from this change? How? These are questions that are helpful to think about as you're moving through planning your pilot also. Making sure that someone will benefit from the information that you're sharing with them, thinking about how they're going to benefit or what they will do, can help you understand how to measure that. So after you're done with your pilot, there are a couple of things that could happen. If the pilot was successful, you might decide that you want to do it larger, scale it up. In that case, you can apply for an additional grant, either from the foundation or from other places, or get more people involved if it's something that doesn't require funding, or both. Expand from just 1 classroom to 5 classrooms at a school. If you've been successful with 1 teacher, chances are that teacher's colleagues or coworkers might listen to that success and be open to trying something in their classroom. If the pilot was successful, you might decide it was successful, but the results really weren't worth all the time that you put into it. And I think that that's okay. Being able to tell people what was successful about it, why it was successful, and then importantly, What was challenging? What was really time consuming that you hadn't expected? Those kinds of pieces of information can really help other people who are planning similar projects, or it might help you in the future if you decide again to try it. It's a great thing to remind yourself, oh yeah, that was really hard. Not doing that again. So if the pilot was unsuccessful, you might decide to give up on the idea. You might say, all right, well, I thought I knew all of my assumptions here, but it turns out this still doesn't get the result that I want. So I'm going to move on and try something else. And this is a valuable thing in piloting. Once you find out that something doesn't work or it's too hard, that can help you move on to other ideas sooner, rather than continue to try and plan a much larger project with this idea, or think about how you would make this idea work. It's great to test it out, see if it works, and move on to something that you may have learned along the way. And if the pilot is unsuccessful, but you learned something useful, like what you could do to change to make your idea successful, you want to try it again. And I think, again, if you know what changes are necessary, or you think might work, you can pilot it again. So what we went through today was the 5 steps to piloting a project. So 1, define what the problem is. 2, define what the solution is and list your assumptions. 3, list your constraints, resources, and activities. 4, create a monitoring plan if you're working with several people and aren't going to be managing all of the parts of the project. And this is just so you, as a project coordinator, can know if there's something that's slowed down or something that won't work, or you need to change part of your plan. And then 5, start an evaluation plan. List the things that might change as a result of the pilot. And one thing that I always recommend also when thinking about what might change is think about things that are easy to measure and numbers that are already being collected somewhere. That's going to be the easiest way to evaluate something, is to go to a source of information that's already out there, rather than creating any measurements yourself. So thank you so much to Sadeep and Maria today for participating in these workshop activities, and to those of you who have tuned in for the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Chris Schilling, myself, Casey Harold, that's K Harold WMF, that's my username, or posting questions on the Inspire campaign talk page. That's another way to reach out with questions. Thank you so much. And here we go, some additional resources. Yeah, pilot tests an idea. It is small, it is simple, and it leads to incremental benefits or has a small impact. All right, thank you so much, everyone.